Hi, hello. Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. I am just going back to my pointer. So I need 1 second. Something get wrong. My apologies. I can't make it work. Voila. It's disappeared. I tried another thing. Okay, well, I will start then with my presentation and then we'll see how to go through the next one. Okay, it's working. Yes. Okay, we are there. I'm sorry. First of all, thank you very much for having me here. It's a pleasure, and I'm going to present now part of the research that I have done during my PhD. So we are all well aware of the importance that documentation has for cultural heritage institutions, allowing for a more consistent retrieval, better management, and easy exchange of data records between software, application, and among institutions. Metadata are essential requirement for information management, and at the same time, they allow cultural information to move outside from the institution and serve other purposes on the web. By enabling data interoperability, metadata allow the reuse of cultural information in new settings and for different purposes, precisely due to the widespread use of cultural heritage institutions, the widespread use of metadata by cultural heritage institutions. It is crucial to approach them critically, thoughtfully reflecting on their nature and in their inherent politics. So this work focuses on Europeana, investigating the politics of the European data model. We argue that when cultural heritage institution joins Europeana, they actively contribute to the creation of the European heritage by mapping the metadata into the ADM and accepting to adhere to a procedure designed to bring them together, despite their national, domain, or thematic differences. In this sense, then, ADM is more than a metadata model, representing an infrastructure for constructing the European identity of national and local cultural institutions. This work is based on the analysis of policy documents and white paper produced by European institutions and by Europeana, combined with an ethnographic research. This relies on interview carried out at the Europeana Foundation headquarters in Den Haag and on the data gathered throughout a survey distributed online among cultural heritage institutions in Europe. And the pointer is not working again. Oh, okay. So, politics are performed on a macro, meso, and micro level. They are expressed both by law and policies and by defined practice and the use of language. They can be defined as the exercise of power throughout dialogue and negotiation or throughout conflict between diverse interests. In this work, metadata politics are the cultural assumption embedded in their creation, which produce wanted or unexpected consequences on the people using the data. Metadata about cultural heritage are generated from interpretation of records held by cultural heritage institutions, which are themselves subjected to cultural, social, and political biases. Far from being neutral and objective description, then, metadata result from an array of conscious and unconscious decisions that underlie both the process of digitization of cultural heritage and curation of digital objects. In this sense, they are authoritative and subjective artifacts, representing a set of cultural assumptions and current and selective understanding of the past and of cultural heritage. To guarantee the interoperability and exchange of information, metadata rely on the use of certified thesauries and vocabulary, resulting in a standardized and somehow simplified description of cultural heritage. By imposing metadata scheme and selected vocabularies, heritage institutions are de facto controlling the interpretation of objects in their collections. Furthermore, the terminology and the structure of metadata determine how an object is retrieved from the database. In other words, metadata affect the context in which the digital item is on display. This context may or may not be relevant for the object, which has itself a history of its own, since it has been acquired by the institution as the result of specific selection criteria. Considering metadata as cultural products allow us to investigate their more profound impact on society, so that we may understand how they determine the current interpretation of culture and heritage, contributing to the construction of narratives about identity and the past. Over the past 2 decades, the European Commission has actively invested in digitizing cultural heritage sector, promoting cultural heritage's online accessibility. To this end, consistent financial support was allocated to projects designed to foster the cooperation between member states, supporting them in digitizing their cultural resources and sharing them on the web. One of these projects was Europeana, currently the largest aggregator of cultural heritage data in Europe. It counts over 60 million digital objects provided by over 40,000 cultural heritage institutions. Europeana includes this, the task of Europeana include the support and the promotion of digital transformation of European cultural heritage sector. To this end, Europeana has developed best practices and standards for cultural heritage institutions. To succeed in these tasks, Europeana has benefited from extensive political and economic support, both from the European Commission and the Member State. Therefore, Europeana is not only a digital service, but the result of a combination of political, cultural, economic, and technological forces. The attention of the Commission towards culture raised with the recognition of the scarce attachment of citizens to the European project. In 1983, the Solemn Declaration of the European Union specifically addressed Europe's history and cultures as means to promote European awareness. Since then, the construction of collective European identity and memory has become an integral part of the Commission cultural agenda. From the early 90s, also digitality was increasingly at the center of the Commission attention, identifying the information society among the priorities for guiding the economic growth. Beside the clear economic ambition, digital policies were also imbued with cultural goals. In the Commission view, the information society provides the opportunity to facilitate the dissemination of European culture, cultural values, and the valorization of a common heritage. In order to generate usable data for the information society, mass digitization of cultural heritage become imperative for member states and public heritage institutions, raising several political, legal, and cultural issues. The Europeana project exemplifies how the European cultural agenda has been operationalized throughout the instrument, both from the digital and the cultural policy framework. When in 2005, 6 heads of state called upon the Commission for the creation of European Digital Library to preserve and share Europe's cultural and linguistic identities, President Barroso gave to Viviane Reding, the Commissioner from Information Society and Media, the task to plan its creation. Europeana became the flagship initiative of the I-2010 strategy, involving cultural heritage institutions from all over Europe. During the launch of its prototype in November 2008, Barroso described the portal as a shop window and a digital doorway to European culture in all its glorious diversity. Well aware of the portal's role in constructing a European identity, he stressed that Europeana has the potential to change the way people see European culture, making it easier for citizens to appreciate their own past, but also to become more aware of their common European identity. But Europeana action is perhaps more influential on national and local heritage institutions. To optimize its business, the Foundation has worked towards the implementation of an infrastructure for aggregating cultural and data and stimulating the digital transformation of the European cultural sector. This infrastructure implied the design of EDM to document the resources and the creation of a network of people and institutions called to work together in line with the policy principle set by the Commission through the Europeana Network Association and the Aggregator Forum. By positioning itself at the center of this network of professionals and institutions, Europeana achieved the leading role in driving the cultural sector digital transformation. Europeana is not a repository of digital heritage, but an aggregator of data that accommodates the information perspective of different cultural domains. In designing EDM, representative of libraries, archives, museums, and audiovisual collection, working group to identify the specific requirement for the novel metadata scheme. As a result, EDM is not based on any community standards, but adopts an open, cross-domain, semantic web-based framework, allowing each data provider to use its preferred metadata standards and vocabulary of reference. On a conceptual level, then, EDM provides the structure to describe information about the who, the what, when, and where of the heritage resource, and is defined by a set of specific design principles. From a data scientist perspective, then, EDM is an adaptable standard that can be extended to provide higher degree of information specialization. In order to assess the impact of Europeana and EDM activities on cultural heritage institutions, we distributed a questionnaire online to target the experience with the metadata scheme. 104 institutions from 26 countries have agreed to participate in the study. Among the respondents, almost one-third collaborated with Europeana as a data provider or as an aggregator. They expressed a series of concerns about the EDM. The most shared concern regarded the wrong information generated through automatic data enrichment. This is especially problematic in the case of erroneous enrichment that may occur when two entities have the same name, such as the homonymy of authors or occasions, which the algorithm is unable to distinguish. Therefore, cultural heritage institutions express annoyance over the misleading enrichment data that for Europeana users appear to be their responsibility. A second concern regarded the copyright of the metadata provided to Europeana that normally are licensed as CC0. This approach turned out to be problematic for many institutions, which consider part of their documentation the result of intellectual work, either by curation or research activity. Consequently, they publish their metadata using the CC BY license. In their survey, these institutions declared that when sharing their data with Europeana, they had to decide what information to provide in CC0 and what to retain by their database, resulting in a minimal dataset available in EDM. Another matter that generates some discontent among cultural heritage institutions is the generic nature of EDM, which reduces its granularity to the information provided. Many institutions, and also some aggregators, lamented that EDM is too generic to accommodate the complexity of their internal documentation. Nevertheless, a consistent number of institutions have decided to share their data with Europeana, recognizing the benefit of this initiative. In order to understand the politics enforced by mapping the metadata of digital cultural heritage institutions in EDM, it is useful to reflect on three main cultural assumptions that it embedded. First, Europeana received data exclusively from cultural heritage institutions, entrusted as the most accurate sources of cultural heritage information. Aiming at building a comprehensive, trustworthy, and authoritative source of cultural heritage data, Europeana intends to become the primary trusted source of European collective memory. This Europe responds to cultural heritage institution demand for retaining control over the cultural information. Consequently, The adjective authoritative, used by Europeana to define the quality of its data, also applies to the nature of its collection, in that it expresses a traditional, top-down, and authority-level relation with the past, exemplifying what Smith defined as authorized heritage discourse. Second, Europeana supports and encourages the use of internationally recognized vocabularies and thesauri to facilitate information standardization. This approach, which is essential for the optimal diffusion of interoperable and reusable data on the web, is far from being neutral or culturally unbiased. Cultural heritage institutions are well aware of the biases hidden in their documentation of their collection and have worked consistently towards a more inclusive and decolonized or diverse representation of their archives. Collection and databases have been scrutinized and efforts have been made to turn them more representative and inclusive, also thanks to the adoption of new user-generated and specialized vocabularies. But these descriptors are often not included in control vocabularies, making their use not recommended on aggregators such as Europeana. By promoting the use of standardized concepts and vocabularies, then, Europeana risks jeopardizing institutional effort of enforcing diversity and inclusion in their archives, involuntarily becoming the perpetrator of an authoritative and exclusive vision of cultural heritage. Third, Europeana establishes a clear definition of digital cultural heritage. ADM makes a conceptual distinction between the physical object, its digital representation, and the metadata provided for each of these elements. In this sense, ADM remarks the contrast between the digital and the real, and the set of specific information belonging to each. On the other hand, the structure of the model brings together the data on the physical object and the digital reproduction in the same entry. In doing so, then, ADM allows for a conceptual representation of digital heritage as an assemblage of physical and digital properties. Within this perspective, the contextual meaning attributed to an object in the digital world becomes inextricable part of its cultural value. And as a consequence, considering the digital heritage as an assemblage allows transferring the value of Europeanness from the digital surrogate in the Europeana collection to the item preserved in the cultural institutions. So, to conclude, this work has analyzed the cultural implication of ADM with the introduction of Europeana model to represent cultural heritage information on the web. Europeana has established a new international standard that profoundly impacts the internal procedure of European cultural heritage institutions in Europe. When sharing their collection of Europeana portal, institutions accept to adhere to a set of practice that force them to adapt to, their internal policy to the European requirements. And at the same time, they are actively producing a collection of European heritage, which appropriate on a European level all the resources held by member states as national heritage. The analysis of ADM presented in these articles reveal how crucial it is to approach digital infrastructure critically, through a thoughtful evaluation of their social significance from a political and an ethical perspective. So this work has already been published, if the pointer is going to use, in this article, where you can also find all the references that have been used to prepare it. And with this, I want to thank you, and I conclude my presentation.
Thank you very much for this very intense and thought-provoking presentation. I really appreciate this kind of meta-level reflection. We've all basically run out of time, but if we have, so there is a very, I don't know if it's a rhetoric question, how to participate in Europeana.eu platform on WorkSub. But it's the question is so generic, I even don't know how to address it. But do we have some quick comments? Yes. Can we have a microphone in the last row, please?
It's not really a comment, it's a question, because you've pointed out all the problems with Europeana, which is very interesting and thought-provoking indeed. It gets me thinking, but I was wondering if you also propose solutions for those problems, if you've come up with something.
Well, I think a lot has to do with how institution and how thesaurus are made official, let's say. So let's say that a lot of the problems doesn't really belongs to Europeana itself, but to a level that is prior to Europeana. So I suppose that most has to be done at the level of what is standard, what is considered as a standard, and therefore then all this new information that maybe are produced as, let's say, local solution can become a part of a standard, and then they can be implemented to enrich as well aggregators and that metadata aggregate there, and so benefiting also platforms like Europeana. So I think Europeana in this can become a sort of broker stimulating the action of on other levels.
Thank you. Okay, I think unfortunately we don't have time for discussion anymore. Thank you very much, and you also referenced your article, so everybody who's interested can get a more thorough read on the topic.